Welcome to the Space Limited Accomplishments interval. My name is Lance Ash, and sitting in the seat beside me is my wife, Bonnie, as usual.
Hello.
And we forgot to record the show yesterday, and we had a really good discussion, and then we realized, oh crap, we could have recorded all this, so we've got to try to replicate that as much as possible. But I don't think we had a general theme. I can't remember, but so we got a
At one point I thought we were doing a sedition edition and discussing politics, but you want to go with good versus evil?
Well, yeah, we did talk about politics a good bit last night. But something I brought up right before I got out of the car to go to work last night was that I see a common theme in Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and Star Wars, in which, in all three of those series, or main parts of those series, the bad guy wants to cheat death, wants to live forever, and is willing to do anything to achieve that purpose, but is defeated by a hero who is willing to die in order to save his friends and to beat him. And that act of self-sacrifice is totally incomprehensible to the bad guy, and that's his blind spot. That's his chink in the armor. So that's an interesting observation, I think, and I should get like some kind of prize, literary prize for that, a pen award maybe. But we don't normally talk about politics on the show, but let's anything you want to say about last week?
I think that it was the natural outcome, the expected outcome of what happens when you undermine education, when you promote ignorance, when you embrace myth and fear and stupidity.
Yeah, I think that sort of tangential to that, I won't just say Republicans, but people in general who believe that government shouldn't do jack shit except protect the property rights of the rich. They don't want taxpayer money. They don't want taxes at all, but they certainly don't want any government services except the bare minimum. And so they don't believe in public education. And that plays right into the hands of fundamentalist Christians who don't believe in modern science. They don't like the implications of modern science, and so they don't want it taught.
Nor do they want critical thinking taught.
Well, they claim they do. But anyway, so over the years, the Republicans and the conservatives have slowly gutted public education more and more and more. And then when the natural result of that occurs, which is poorly educated people and lowered test scores and lowered standards, then they turn around and go, see, public education doesn't work. So, and the same thing's happening in Britain with the Conservative Party gutting the NHS more and more and more and saying, see, it doesn't work. We need to privatize it. We need to sell it off. So, and a historical point in favor of my argument that I've made before is after World War II, America was flush with cash and it was in an economically dominant position. That combined with the scare put into the American government by the Soviet Union's surprising successes in space exploration contributed to them deciding to pour money into public education, especially this science education. And, along with that was extra money for art education and literature. So what happened? You had the hippies come out of that. And these were the most educated generation in history. And what did they do? They questioned the values of their elders. They questioned authority. they were given so much education that they had enough to know that a lot of what they had been spoon-fed was bullshit. And so, as a result of that, the federal government said, well, we're not going to let that happen again. So then they began to cut back on education more and more and more. So anyway, what you got to say?
Well, I think there's also another issue at play, and it's the American spirit of individualism versus the European spirit of community and collective society. And yes, I know that probably sounds like some sort of Marxist phrase, but when you live in each other's pockets, as you do in Europe, you've got all these different countries bordering so closely together, and some of them barely the size of some of our states here. You're forced to live together, and you come up with rules that benefit everyone and work towards living together in large groups. And so there are a lot of community projects as a result, because people really do want to have open spaces, and they do want to have parks and green spaces. They want to have clean streets and clean air and such. And so this idea of community, working together for the collective good, is a lot more prevalent in Europe. And included in that are things like education, like healthcare, like leave for paternity, maternity leave, a number of social services. And we are so steeped in this individualism, this ruggedness, the American alone out in the wilderness. And it seems to be working against our needs now that we have a large population. We have large population centers. And I think that right there, that individualism is getting in the way of what's good for Americans as a whole.
Well, I think that, I had something to say concurrent with that. I got distracted somehow. But let's pause it for a second while I think. I remember now. Well, the Republican Party, and especially the conservative side of it, not the David Brooks side of it, is going to find out very quickly, I hope. What is that, an ambulance?
Pause, please.
They're going to find out that, to their surprise,
You reap what you sow?
that far more Americans than they realize actually want government services. They actually want all these things that they have denigrated for so long, and they want them paid for by a progressive system of taxation where the rich... I've discussed this before, I think. But anyway...
Well, I think there's a great irony in the fact that so many of these Republican conservatives, a vast majority of them, belong to this elderly group who are benefiting from Medicaid and Medicare, who are benefiting from Social Security. And they talk about socialist.
Yeah, but they don't want people who they see as unworthy or undeserving taking advantage of those very same things. We paid big taxes into the system for years, and now we're reaping the benefits. But these people paid nothing.
The reality is these people didn't pay in as much as what they're taking out, what they're costing the system. And we see that through the exponential growth in the cost of health care. There is no way in hell their Medicaid taxes begin to cover what they are now having to receive in hospital services, etc., because the growth of medical costs have gone so sky high.
Yeah. Well,
The other thing that's ironic is the fact that a lot of these people belong to take states. They are not donor states. They are recipient states. They receive a larger proportion of tax dollars from the federal government than the states pay in. Things like California and New York are donor states. They see a lot of revenues. They go into the federal coffers, and they use less of it. And interestingly, those states also provide more social safety nets for their citizens because of the economic progress. It's, again, just irony.
well, normally I want to avoid politics on the show, but the events of last week are just too much to avoid talking about. And I want to point out that, let's just say, I mean, this whole lunk-headed attack on the Capitol was bound to fail. I don't know what they expected to achieve, but let's just say that by some fluke, some fumbling.
What if they had breached somebody's office? What if they had taken hostages?
Well, what if they had somehow managed
somebody?
What if they had
shot somebody?
No, what if they had managed to stop the count and convince the Congress, oh, look at this overwhelming show of force. We will clearly declare Trump the dictator for life. Do you think that Trump would have come out and said, okay, fellas, thanks a lot for your help, but that's not how we do things here in America?
Yeah,
and
he would have seized power.
That's exactly right.
Power.
And 20 years from now, we'd be under the thumb of King Donald II. I mean, so I remember that one guy. There was one guy. CNN had him, and he was one of the protesters or one of the mob, and he said, what are we supposed to do? I mean, well, you could try changing your worldview, or maybe thinking about the fact that maybe you're wrong. Maybe the world is older than 5,000 years old. Maybe white people aren't the master race, and maybe there is no Jesus watching out for you and Trump. I don't know. It's amazing to me. Okay, when I was a little kid, my parents were Democrats, and they were Democrats because they were Southerners of a certain generation. They were the children of people who went through the Depression and went through World War II, and they were members of a union. And when Reagan was first running, I was going to that crazy Christian school, and they would say, now remember, kids, go home and tell your kids to vote for Reagan now. So I would go home and tell my mother, you got to vote for Reagan. And she'd say, Reagan? No! He's going to privatize the post office, and I'll be out of a job. But slowly over time, they became convinced that the Democrats were given handouts to freeloaders and welfare queens.
But more than that, they embraced the idea that Republicans were the Christian party.
I don't know about that with my parents so much, but I knew people at school whose parents were like that, very much so. Because our church wasn't an activist church the way theirs were. A lot of these big churches in town were full of rich people who were just livid at the idea of having to pay more taxes. And so they had somehow conflated their religious beliefs with a tax protest movement. So it's just odd how my parents slowly shifted over from not really the left, but to the Republican Party at least. My parents didn't vote for Reagan either time, but by the time Bush ran, when Bush Senior's first election was against Dukakis, and I remember asking my mother, who are you going to vote for? And she's like, well, Dukakis. And I got all upset because back then I was a Republican. And so anyway, when Reagan died, I remember discussing, with my parents, Reagan died the other day. And my dad goes, yeah, I always liked old Reagan. And I thought,
what a crap.
You didn't vote for him ever. You hated him at the time. Although I do remember my dad was so delighted when he threatened to fire he did fire the air traffic controllers. Folks, there's nothing wrong with unions, okay? Let's talk about something happier.
Happy, happy, joy, joy. The fact that you have a union job. The fact that with your union job, you have job protections. That with your union job, you have paid medical leave that accrues. That you have vacation time that accrues. The fact that you have access to a variety of different services. It's just amazing what the union will allow. And guess what? People who don't have union jobs are jealous of you. They hate the fact that you have it. They think you're overpaid when in fact we're getting by, you know?
People who own their own businesses are not, though. They hate unions. Even where our son works, there's a sign up in the break room. He said, I know, they said there's a sign up in the break room saying, remember, you're better off without a union. Listen, one of the first things that Biden ought to do is, he has nothing to lose at his age and the position he's in. Hey, one of the first things he ought to do is say some unpopular things, like come out and say, I just want to remind everybody in this country that every single employed person in this country has a right to join a union, and has a right to start a union, and has a right to talk about starting a union.
That's right.
And so, I don't know when we started the show. I don't know how much time we have left here, but so okay, totally different topic, or as they say in German, Themawechsel. Don't wave your hands at me, woman. We listened to Achilles' Last Stand by Led Zeppelin, and I played it for Bonnie first time she'd ever heard it, and then she said I wouldn't mind hearing that again. So I had to read the lyrics in between times. We listened to it again last night, and I gotta say that's my favorite Led Zeppelin song, and the album it's on, Presence, is my favorite Led Zeppelin album, which I know is a controversial position to take amongst some people, but it's just an absolute masterpiece of lyrics, drumming, rhythm, guitar solo, everything, production, just unbelievable. What do you have to say about it?
I have no opinion about Led Zeppelin. I just think that they're a great group, and I think that they and their music transcend time.
If you go to a store that sells posters and shit like that, the amount of Led Zeppelin merchandise is rivaled only by the Beatles. And it's quite amazing to me that after all this time, number one, the Beatles are still the most popular band in the world overall, and Zeppelin has moved up to where they're number 2.
I definitely like them better than the Rolling Stones.
Really?
Yeah. And maybe it has something to do with Robert Plant's later work with Alison Krauss and such, or solo. But I like the variety of stuff they do.
I think it's amazing how slowly over the years Black Sabbath has gotten more and more popular. But
more and more appreciated.
More and more appreciated. But I think with the general population, with them, it's more of an image thing rather than
with them.
With Black Sabbath.
Okay.
It's more. It's not like, oh, I love this obscure album here or there. But I will say, as far as the band's continued popularity is concerned, they owe 85% of that to Ozzy's continued presence in the public consciousness. That last Black Sabbath album is unbelievable.
But as good as that is, Iommi is equal to it in its...
Of the solo record?
Yes, it's fabulous.
Yeah, I wish Jimmy Page had done something like that back, when it was still opportune to do so.
Yeah. Get a select group of great vocalists, work with them on the lyrics, and showcase what he does best.
He tried to do that 20 or 30 years ago now with his solo record, and it sucks.
Who was it he teamed up with?
Well, he had one song with Robert Plant, and the rest of it was split between two third-rate British bar band blues vocalists who suck and whose lyrics suck. And the whole thing was just so tepid and weak. And I remember, looking forward to it. Can't wait till that comes out. It's called Outrider. And going down the day that it came out or the day after, and a friend of mine went with me, and we both got a copy. And the guy behind the counter said, "It sucks." And I bought it anyway, and I was like, oh God, he's right. It's terrible.
Oh God.
Okay, what we'll do is when we get up here to the exit, we'll cut it off, because I don't know how long we've been talking with it. Yeah. But we could expand the show to 30 minutes.
It's up to you, dear. We talk ad nauseum every night.
Yeah. We also last night we listened to the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac. And the reason I chose those three bands is because I'm easily manipulated. Many years ago, Rolling Stone magazine had an issue about the 70s, and they picked the three bands that most exemplify or typify the 70s, and they picked those three: Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, and the Eagles. And what's the common thread between those three bands, Bonnie?
I'm sorry, what was the statement? I'm trying to pass this idiot going 50 on a 65.
I said, what's the common
Thread between who?
among Led Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, and the Eagles?
I have no idea. What?
Cocaine! Oh my God.
Here I was trying to find some obscure keyboardist or lyricist. It's cocaine.
Or a producer or something, but no.
Yes.
I mean, can you imagine how big of a truck you'd need to hold all the coke those guys did at that time period?
I'm going to go with semi instead of just moving truck. A double semi.
Did you know that, I think I'm right in saying this, Stevie Nicks was warned some time ago that she was going to have to have her nose removed if she didn't stop doing it.
That's great.
All right, we're going to cut it off there, and we'll see you later. Thank you very much for listening.